publicity. In fact, I think they just got some publicity today in terms of child sex abuse in Australia. We are, of course, talking about the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church, certainly has, at least in the past, had a serious clergy sexual misconduct problem, clergy abuse problem, including rather too much child sex abuse. But it's not like the Unitarian Universalists or other religious communities are free from clergy sexual misconduct of various kinds, or even child sex abuse. In fact, I think I mentioned earlier that in my right hand I have a picket sign that says "Atheist Unitarian Universalists are accusing me of blasphemy." And on the other hand there, this is what I'm displaying right now, "Unitarian Universalist perversion of justice, sucks you asterisk you." If we go around the corner, we'll see my picket signs that once again protest the fact that Unitarian Universalists misuse blasphemy law to cover up and even perhaps try to deny child sex abuse committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers. And this is the interesting thing is, every community of a significant size is going to have at least a few sex offenders in the community, including in the clergy. If you got like 1,500 ministers, which I think is about how many Unitarian Universalist ministers there are in North America, just in terms of statistics, there's going to be a few pedophiles and a few rapists and even more clergy that are guilty of less serious forms of clergy abuse. So it's one thing to have a certain amount of clergy sex abuse within your religious community. It's almost unavoidable. It's another thing to protect the ministers when complaints about clergy sex abuse or even non-sexual abuse are lodged against them. And unfortunately, the Unitarian Universalist religious community goes to stunningly foolish lengths to try to hide clergy sex abuse within the Unitarian Universalist religious community, and also goes to incredibly foolish lengths to pretend, that Unitarian Universalist ministers are not guilty of various forms of non-sexual abuse as well. But let's bring it back to the Unitarian Universalist Association's false blasphemous libel accusation against me. In June of 2012, June 1st of 2012, I opened my email inbox, and in my email inbox there was an email from Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-André Coulombe, which amongst other highly questionable accusations falsely accused me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel for allegedly, and I do underline allegedly, making, and this is an exact quote from the letter, unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. So essentially, Maitre Marc-André Coulombe, on behalf of the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston, was accusing me of blasphemous libel, criminal act that's still in the Canadian Criminal Code, essentially an anti-blasphemy law. And essentially he was saying that I was violating Canada's anti-blasphemy law by allegedly making unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the Unitarian Universalist Association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. Well, I knew that I'd blogged about a couple of cases of pedophilia and rape. In fact, just one case of actual pedophilia, although there are others that I was aware of and hadn't blogged about, but there was one case in particular that I had blogged about, where a parishioner of Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein's parish in First Parish Norwell, Unitarian Universalist Church in Massachusetts. This parishioner, to the best of my knowledge, not even a Unitarian Universalist minister, Richard Buell, was charged, tried, and convicted of, what Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe describes as such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. Specifically, Richard Buell was convicted of the repeated and forcible rape of preteen girls, including a female family member who was most likely a granddaughter, but could possibly have been a grand niece or something. But based on the age difference, the female family member would not likely have been a daughter. Although based on what I heard from reasonably reliable sources on the internet, it seems that Richard Buell had also raped his own daughters, but that they hadn't reported the rapes, and that the statute of limitations ran out, and so they were unable to prosecute him. But then what happened is his daughters became aware of one of their daughters being raped by Richard Buell, and the statute of limitations had not run out in that case, and so it was reported, and Richard Buell found himself in a court of law, and he was convicted of forcible rape of preteen girls who were no older than 12 years old at the times that the rapes took place, and by some estimates could have been as young as 6. The general estimate given was between 9 and 12, which is still very young, but some estimates put the youngest age, in terms of the rapes first starting, being when at least one of the victims was 6 years old. So very young children. And this was the only pedophile that I had blogged about. There are pedophile Unitarian Universalist ministers who have also been charged, tried, and convicted of sexual abuse of children, and have been sentenced to jail terms for their child sex abuse. But I hadn't actually blogged about them prior to being accused of blasphemous libel by Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe. So it was basically incompetence on his part to, accuse me of, specifically of making unfounded allegations of ministers committing pedophilia when I hadn't actually done so. So in any case, I responded to Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe's blasphemous libel accusation, and the other ones as well, by telling him that I was having considerable difficulty finding blog posts that matched his description, and would he please provide titles of the blog posts he was talking about, or URLs, that is internet addresses, or at least a date or something to identify exactly which blog post he was talking about, because he did not identify them in his initial cease and desist demand letter. He just spoke in those very general terms. I'll repeat verbatim, or more or less verbatim, what was said. This is very much an exact quote. Your unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape are defamatory. And then it went on to say that, you know, they were so defamatory that they amounted to or constituted the criminal act of blasphemous libel. So I'm telling Maître Marc-André Coulombe that I can't find blog posts that match that description. Please provide more information. Please tell me which blog post you're talking about. Now, I obviously knew that I blogged about Richard Buell. I also knew that I blogged about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, who was convicted of the forcible and repeated rape of teenage Tibetan refugees. That was it. That's all I blogged about. There's other cases, I can assure you, but those are the only two that I'd blogged about prior to being accused of blasphemous libel by Maître Marc-André Coulombe. And the reason those were the only two that I blogged about is because they were the two that were the most solidly supported by evidence. You know, there was newspaper articles about how Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell had been convicted of rape and how Richard Buell had been convicted of rape. So there was no question, you know, that these two Unitarian Universalists had been charged, tried, and convicted of rape. And you know, I was trying to avoid possible libel suits. You know, it never occurred to me that Unitarian Universalists would actually accuse me of a crime for blogging about clergy sex crimes, as it were. Unitarian Universalist sex crimes. But that's what happened. So anyway, instead of doing what I asked, which was perfectly reasonable, like, let me know which blog post you're talking about so I can go and have a look and decide what to do, Maître Marc-André Coulombe wrote back to me and very arrogantly said, and this is more or less an exact quote, it's not quite as exact as the one I just gave, but essentially said, your claims not to be able to find the offending material are not credible, blah, 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 blah. Essentially, he basically told me to go find the blog post myself, you know. In others, he refused to identify the blog post that I was asking him to identify, and he was claiming